If you're passionate about great cheese and enjoy natural beauty, the Jura Mountains of the Franche-Comté region in France are as good as it gets. The cool, clean air of this beautiful region is good enough to bottle. And the landscape of rich green pastures, steep forested slopes, blue lakes and waterfalls is simply stunning. The Franche-Comté region contains more than 40% of all the forests in France. But what we've come here for is some really delicious cheese. The forests that lie along the French-Swiss border have a long association with cheese, and these forests lend their name to one of the most famous types. In the days of King Charlemagne, the forests were used as fuel by local cheesemakers, and in those days they were known as Gruyere. That's where the name Gruyere comes from. Across the border in France, the best Gruyere you can buy is Comte. Gruyere de Comte is a delicious raw milk cheese made using the rich alpine milk of Montbéliard cows. Each cheese is made in large, crusty wheels, which weigh up to 30 kilos. Protected by a thick brown natural rind, the interior should be smooth and ivory-coloured and have a sweet, nutty, condensed flavour. The huge size of Comte wheels originated as a way of keeping cheese through the long, harsh mountain winters. Comte is the most important of all the cheeses made under the French appellation system because it represents the most volume. Every step of the process is closely controlled, and the first of these begins right here with these Montbéliard cows, because all cheeses must be made with only their milk. The Montbéliard breed have been grazing these mountain pastures for centuries, but due to the harshness of the winters, most farms here still have less than 40 cows. These gentle beasts are treated almost like family, and it's hard not to be impressed by their calm and inquisitive nature. Huge bells clanging from their necks, just in case the weather turns and they get lost. These beauties are so well loved and cared for that the farmers usually have a name for each of them. After the snows have cleared in spring, the cows are put out to graze on the lush flowering pastures. Despite thick snow for up to 4 months a year, the Franche-Comté region produces the most popular of all the cheeses controlled under the French AOC system. AOC guarantees the origin of a cheese, and in the case of Comte, the process is very closely controlled from start to finish to ensure its reputation is not compromised. There's no such thing as a large producer of Comte. One of the secrets behind this great cheese is the way it's still produced on a small scale by tiny dairies, or fruitiers as they're known. There are more than 190 of these, and 80% of them are organised as cooperatives. That means it's an essential link between the producer, the farmer, and the affineur. At this particular dairy at Montmahou, they produce between 12 and 24 wheels of cheese a day, depending on the season. Only fresh raw milk can be used for Comte, and that means milk is collected and delivered to the dairy every day.
On arrival, it's pumped into large copper vats where rennet and starters are added. And the temperature is slowly raised to over 48 degrees Celsius. When the curd is judged ready, the cheesemaker begins the process of cutting the curds. Nowadays, this process is almost entirely mechanised, with rotating metal blades cutting the curd into rice-sized pieces to encourage rapid drainage. Once the size and texture is considered just right, the curds and whey are pumped into large hoops using giant pipes. The mixture is still very hot, and great care needs to be taken as the whey spills from the mould, which makes quite a spectacular scene. Once the huge moulds are filled, the cheesemaker places a label, a mesh screen and a hard circular cover onto the top surface of each baby Comte. They are then placed into metal racks to be further pressed and drained overnight. Each dairy has a small maturation area where young cheeses are stored on pine shelving for several weeks. After salting, the floppy young cheeses are flipped regularly until they develop a thin rind and begin to firm up.
Et quel type de sel?
Du sel de mer.
Ah oui?
Du gros sel de mer.
Sea salt. Yes, large grains of sea salt. We salt like that for 24 hours, everywhere. We must salt the cheese. If we don't, the cheese will become hard in a few days and the salt won't be able to penetrate the cheese. We must salt them at the beginning, both sides. One day one side. The day after, we rub the side because the salt has melted. 2 days later, you turn the cheese side down, salt again. We do it for about 3 weeks, for the salt to penetrate the cheese. The label shows the day, the month, with the year, and the code of the cheese dairy. There are 2 letters. For us, it is ES. It is compulsory. It is a passport for the cheese.
The last link in the chain is ripening, a task requiring large maturation facilities, expertise, and of course, lots of patience. This skilled job is undertaken by affineurs, who select and transport the young cheeses from the dairies for storage in special maturation facilities. Most of these are in the department of Doubs. These cellars are absolutely massive, with literally thousands of wheels stacked from floor to ceiling on special pine shelving. Humidity is kept at 90% to prevent the cheeses from cracking and drying out, and the various stages of maturation are very carefully monitored. The first of these involves branding the new cheeses with a date and dairy number that can be deciphered when the cheese has been matured. And from here, it's into a relatively warm environment of 14 degrees Celsius to encourage fermentation. After a few months, the cheeses are moved to rooms where the temperature is a more moderate 10 to 12 degrees.
Avancez un peu bien, comme ça va. Très bien.
Legend has it that an enterprising Comte cheesemaker reached the end of the day with not enough curd left to make a whole cheese. Not wanting to waste the leftover curd, he placed them in a small cheese draining hoop and rubbed ash from the cauldron on the surface to keep the flies away. The following day, he was faced with the same dilemma and topped up the hoop with more fresh curds, so creating the famous Morbier. Regardless of whether this legend is true, Morbier is fast developing a dedicated following in France after almost becoming extinct. The difference nowadays is that a combination of plant dye and salt rather than soot is used to create the unusual central stripe. Jean Perrin is a name associated with quality cheese, and it's largely thanks to this hard-working family that Morbier has undergone a resurgence in popularity. Under the guidance of the family matriarch, Madame Perrin,
Voilà le Comte
Hey, Morbier.
et le Morbier.
the family produced Comte, Morbier, and a range of other fabulous specialist cheeses.
L'histoire de Jean Perrin.
Jean Perrin is the second generation. I started this company with Jean Perrin 1st of January 1965 with 310 liters of milk and produced some Morbier. We didn't realize we had revived the Morbier.
Voilà. Oui, d'accord. Très bien.
It was with her blessing that I was able to visit a tiny farmhouse high in the Jura to see how Morbier has been made for centuries. Inside a traditional copper cauldron, fresh milk is treated with starters and rennet and left to set. After coagulation, the curd is cut by hand once and left for 5 minutes before being cut again to the size of corn kernels. While the mixture is stirred for about half an hour, it is gently heated to 30 degrees to shrink the curd and help separate the whey. Which is then partially drained off. Fresh hot water is poured in to reduce acid levels and smooth the texture of the curd. Fine sea salt is then added, and our master cheesemaker Anne then draws the curd into a cheesecloth using a very ingenious method.
This is incredible. They don't use this technique to make cheese very much anymore. Very careful handmade cheese.
Anne places the hot curds into wooden hoops and wraps them in cloth. young cheeses are allowed to drain under their own weight for a few minutes until they're ready for the all-important business of receiving their stripes. Each cheese is sliced in half. The vegetable dye and sea salt are then rubbed in. The two halves of cheese are recombined and a Morbier is born. Each cheese receives a label and it's ready for ripening. In fact, Anne's father is Madame Perrin's brother, and he's in charge of ripening the cheese at a small cellar not far from the dairy.
Anne, racontez-moi votre histoire.
Alors, mon histoire dans le fromage, elle a débuté il y a 3 ans.
The cheese making started 3 years ago. I joined my father in the running of the company. My father has been here since 1990, and he always had the passion to make cheese instead of selling milk. I follow him in his adventure. He taught me how to produce directly. Now I have the taste for this profession. Voila, I am lucky to be involved in it.
A good Morbier cheese will be slightly fruity and aromatic with a subtle sweet texture. Wines from the Jura, such as Abois, or dry white wines, such as Riesling, make great companions to this unique cheese. Morbier has been adopted under the AOC system, and the continuing dedication of the Perrin family will no doubt see it grow in popularity well into the future. For my final lesson on Comte, I travelled to a unique facility perched on the top of a mountain on the French-Swiss border. The underground fort of Saint Antoine was built in the 19th century to protect France from the Prussians, and its unique, cold, damp environment has proved perfect for maturing Comte. The cheese matured here is some of the finest in France and bears the name Marcel Petit.
Philippe, can you explain to me all about Marcel Petit?
Marcel Petit
is a family business which he founded just before the Second World War. It was in the Caveau des Bernardines, a former convent. Then the war started, and after the war, he carried on with the cheese business. At that time, he was selling Comte like everyone else, an ordinary Comte. He was a man who had a passion for that product. He understood it. And for him, the best thing to do was to mature a cheese in 3 or 4 months, the way they used to do it at that time. And he had the idea to mature the Comte for a longer time at low temperature. Before, the Comte used to be matured at temperature of 15, 16, 17 and sometimes 18 degrees. It was a very quick maturing. He has a conviction that his products, the great Comte coming from the cheese dairy of Savoy, was cared for like vintage wine and mature for a long time at a low temperature.
Over 60,000 wheels of cheese from more than 50 dairies are ripened here, and each one is eventually graded by Claude, the head affineur. To check the rind condition, Claude rubs every cheese with the palm of his hand and then gently taps it with the end of a small cheese iron to ensure there are no holes or cracks.
This is the best bit. This is where you actually get to try the cheese. Is it treble? It's really good, lovely and sweet. Got a lovely texture to it. It's just about ready to go to market.
When the cheese is considered mature enough, Claude marks the rind with a special code, which looks a bit like hieroglyphics.
One of the really interesting things about this cheese is how every single one is different, depending on how it's made, where it's made, and the season it's made. And then, of course, there's a question of how long it's been matured. One of the good indicators is to look for this green bell around the outside. That means it's scored 15 out of 20 and is really good quality. But for my money, I like to look for cheeses that are at least 18 months old.
When it comes to selecting good cheese, the rind shouldn't be too thick, and the interior should have a smooth, dense ivory colour that becomes more granular with age. Perhaps the most famous dish made with Comte is fondue, and Philippe showed me the traditional technique using a selection of 3 cheeses of different ages. The fondue pot is first rubbed with fresh garlic. Then local Jura wine is added. Each of the cheeses is slowly mixed in until it melts into a creamy fondue.
Look at that. That's fantastic. Magnificent. A lovely combination.
Few cheeses can equal the divine, sweet, nutty, concentrated flavour
Looks great.
of a well-matured Comte.
Thank you very much. A revelation.
It's no wonder that more Comte is produced than any other specialist cheese bearing the famous AOC label. From the Gruyere forests and King Charlemagne to the gentle Montbéliard cows, this exceptional cheese is truly the stuff of Alpine legends.